90 or 91% came from the feds. $5 million was the total outlay from the state of Washington.
Yes, and
$12 million for Oregon because the line isn't drawn in the middle of the
Yes,
river.
yes.
And the feds came up with all the rest. That worked really well.
And there was no tolling to make that bridge happen. And another, in my perception also, let me say this, going back to my hat as the political affairs director, I think the building industry group supports a bridge that is sustainable, fiscally sustainable, that doesn't bankrupt our community. I think that we realizing that Glenn Jackson I-205 bridge was built in 1982 with very little local money compared to the Fed match.
Yes.
There's no reason why a bridge can't be built with the same, I look at $170 million, even taking the rate of inflation from 1982 to 2011, how can you go from $170 million to $3.6 billion for a crossing that's not nearly as complex? And that goes back to, I know I'm preaching to the choir here to you because you're very passionate about the new bridge. When they built 205, they retrofitted it for the possibility of light rail at some time in the future. I think that it's probably okay to have the bridge designed so that light rail can be added later, but without even an advisory vote from the citizens in Clark County, I think we have no business building it with light rail with the intention of operating light rail on day one once the bridge opens. I don't think our community is ready for it. I don't think they have the money to pay for it. And I understand the need to improve the infrastructure to move business and goods and commerce between the two states and actually up and down the whole West Coast.
Which is the primary reason that people are looking at a bridge. Well, let me get back to the vote thing for a minute, because I had lunch with Mark Bolt last week and asked him about the vote for Clark County, because really a vote, even if it would be great if it was a binding vote, but a binding vote for light rail is not something that legally looks like it can happen, although you can still have a binding vote for something. And
to influence the leaders.
Well,
that's
the federal government, and that's what Patty Murray came to say, that unless the people of this community get behind this project and say we fully support it, it's not going to receive federal funding. If there was a way that we could all get behind a project, for instance, if we just want to replace that bridge, we could all get behind that, because that's a $340 million project. Less than 10% of the cash price of this light rail crossing project. We could all get behind that and do that. So there are two ways that this could happen. At least, well, let me just name one of them. And I presented this to Mark, and he thought, yeah, well, maybe. Well, he didn't really pick up on it. He was thinking, he'll go to the state legislature and see what they can do. And I'm thinking, this is a local, we're talking about local tolls. This is the local match. That's what tolls are. You don't go to the state to try to get this authorized. Even though the state has final authority on this, they look to our local representatives for leadership and for influence on this. The federal government's going to look for buy-in, support, or opposition. If there's strong opposition to this massive mega project, they're not going to fund it. Here's one way.
I don't blame them.
Here's one way that the people of this community can say whether or not they're behind this project. Well, there are some things that the county does have authority to do. For instance, the county has authority to do advertising. You want to put up a $10,000 sign? You want to be able to advertise on a billboard or something? They have authority to do that. So here's a simple way. Just pick one out of the hat here. Put a ballot measure on the ballot, a binding measure that says, hey, citizens, do you support the county advertising a sign that says, we support the light rail project and the CRC project as proposed, and do you authorize $10,000 for that sign? Yes or no? And and you get results back from that. Said, no way. No, that's just when it went down in flames. Well, that would be a pretty good indicator of the county being behind it, or if they not supporting it, or if they say, "Oh, sure, absolutely, passed by 80%." That basically says to the federal government and to the state, we have buy-in. It's just one way of indicating, and that's really what the big question is here: how popular is this project as proposed? Because they're talking about going to construction right away. They're talking about, let's build this thing before there's no finance plan. And at this point, we don't even have a bridge plan. They've actually thrown out the design that they've been working on for years and years because it's not buildable. And so there is a way to find out whether or not this thing is buildable. And I think just truth in advertising, let's not masquerade this light rail crossing project, that $3.6 billion project, as though it's a bridge replacement. Bridge replacement is $330 million. And
That's a good point.
When you add the financing costs, $1.7 billion just for collecting tolls, 2-point-some billion dollars in interest. When you add that all up, it's $8.7 billion for what they're advertising as a bridge replacement, $330 million bridge replacement. I don't think that's truth in advertising. Let's get it all out in the open. If you want to support this project, let's do it. But who in the world is going to be able to come up with that kind of money? That's the problem. We live in a time when we need healthy economy. We need to be able to make sure that people have incentives to move here and to start their business here, and we don't want to increase the cost of living to that degree.
You know, don't you think maybe part of the problem is the policies coming out of Washington, D.C., that projects like this must have a light rail component?
Well, actually, I was at the meeting in Jantzen Beach just about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and a question was put to the review panel at that point. Is light rail or is rapid transit required for this project? And the fella hesitated and he hesitated. He did not want to answer that question because it's unpopular with the people that are paying the bills. No, there is not rapid transit necessary. There is certainly not light rail necessary for this project. It has nothing to do with the authorization of this project.
Well, when the proponents talk about the reasons to support it, is they're talking about freight mobility.
And that sounds really good because
freight doesn't ride light rail.
Yeah, you're not going to ship goods via light rail. That's true. So this project, if we really want to have freight mobility, if we really want to be able to make sure that this corridor can move freight and through traffic, the first place you'd start with, I think I like the question, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Okay, we have 5 lanes, 4 lanes, 3 lanes across the bridge as we go south, 2 lanes at the Rose Quarter, and then 2 lanes and maybe some 3 lanes a little bit further on. Where would you think that you would, where's the choke point? Well, you would first fix the choke point. And they've actually artificially created an additional choke point because of that carpool lane that turns a 3-lane freeway into a virtual 2-lane freeway.
Yes, at certain times of the day. Right.
It's been there, 9 years?
Yes, and even when you think about the bottleneck at Delta Park, it took Oregon years to fix that. I mean, that's only been improved in the last probably 16 or 18 months. Until Oregon can convince me as a Washington voter that they're going to fix the transportation issues south of the Columbia River, I think we need to look elsewhere for a bridge connector. I've talked to so many people. I know that the third bridge option keeps getting shut down, but there's already a corridor that's built with infrastructure in place at 192nd.
Oh, 192nd Avenue. You're speaking my language.
It'll take you right to Troutdale, and then another 4th bridge from Richfield to St. Helens.
Right.
I mean, you look at look at the Willamette River and how many bridges cross the Willamette River downtown Portland. There must
13.
be 13. Okay, 13. I knew you'd know that. And I just heard on the radio the other day they were talking about investing in infrastructure for all these bridges, and I suspect that some of those bridges are as old as the I-5 bridge. I know when they first built I-5 it was just a single span, and then they added the second span later. But if Oregon is investing in their 100-year-old bridges. Certainly,
Yes.
I-5 is worth retrofitting. I know they just spent about $50 million on some new maintenance on the bridge. And I don't see that bridge as, I mean, it's a drawbridge, yes. The fact that it's a drawbridge is a problem when...
They certainly do need to be maintained, and there's a correlation between those cities and those areas that invest large amounts of money in light rail. There's a correlation between that and congestion. You would think that congestion would go down in those cases where they add light rail, but in reality, the congestion normally goes up when you add light rail. And the reason is that the money that would normally be invested in roads and infrastructure to be able to actually move surface traffic, freight, and cars, instead of that money improving those roads, widening those roads, providing alternate ways for those vehicles to get around, that money gets diverted from those roads to light rail instead. And that's what the classic case we have here in Portland. They are putting their money, instead of into roads, they're putting it into light rail. They put $5 billion into light rail over there, and they've got the worst traffic in just, except for LA. You have to go to Seattle or you have to go to LA in order to get worse traffic.
You know, that raises another question. I guess for me, when I think about light rail, less than 3% of the population uses it. Yet on this proposed bridge plan, 100% of us are going to have to pay for it.
The bus service is not something that is put in for profitability. It is something that is subsidized, and it is something that the people that cannot afford their own cars, or people that have difficulty, even just with that kind of expense, the compassionate thing to do is to provide bus service for them, and really the stewardship of that, where you can do it practically. You can align the number of buses and where the routes are, so that you can make sure that those people that need the help for public transportation do have it. But still, the management of that needs to be practical. I would love to see, in fact, we're going to be interviewing Jeff Ham here shortly today.
From C-Tran?
Yes, and I have some very good questions for him. Because
Don't mention the term, and those were not
okay.
my words, those were the bus driver's words, by the way.
No, but I want to make sure that the reason that we provide bus service for many people throughout our county is because of the compassionate factor.
Yes, and I agree that people who are unable to drive, disabled, senior citizens, those people ought to have some kind of
yes. But still, it becomes impractical if you're driving around a near empty bus or a fully empty bus most of the time. That's where, okay, let's actually look at the numbers and say who's riding, and make sure we have the appropriate vehicle out there. Maybe it's a van instead of this huge bus.
Yes, C-Tran needs to be nimble so that they can change.
Need to be practical.
Yes.
Meet the need and get the most bang for the buck, so that we can all afford it. One thing about this light rail is that the expense of light rail, even though it may be very useful, very helpful for people to be able to get from point A to point B on light rail, there's people that take it every day over there in Portland, which is great. But we live in Vancouver, which is a lower density area here.
And far more spread out as well.
Yes, it's a different, and I'm glad we don't have the density of Portland. I don't want to have that kind of a density. But the practicality, it's a non-essential service. You're talking about billions of dollars, or at least $1 billion, and I think it really, the bulk of this cost of this project, what really drives that is the light rail factor.
Absolutely.
I think they're minimizing how much the cost really is for that, and how much is really in comparison to what really moves surface traffic. For instance, the proposed bridges, each of the proposed bridges that they're considering, they're basically huge amounts of steel in those bridges. And the reason is that the bridge needs to be a double-decker. And that double-decker bridge basically doubles the cost of the bridge, not only for the initial construction, but for the maintenance.